Today, I'm going to review and analyze the movie Citizen Kane. I think we've all heard about this movie before. We've heard that it's the greatest movie ever made, and that every critic has it on their top 10 movies of all time list. So, what makes Citizen Kane a great movie? I remember watching the movie when I was around 16, and I fell asleep. And after that, I never really watched it again because I thought it was a boring black and white movie. But a couple of years later, I watched it again and I was surprised that I liked it so much. Now, if you've never watched this movie and you're interested in directing or becoming a cinematographer, you should definitely watch it, maybe even more than once. Why is that? Well, because Citizen Kane uses amazing camera and editing techniques and has influenced so many movies that came after it. This movie, the greatest movie in the history of cinema, was made by 25-year-old Orson Welles. Yeah, 25. The genius cinematographer of the movie was Greg Toland, who was nominated 5 times over a 7-year span for an Academy Award for Best Cinematography. Orson Welles was given complete creative control, which was very, very rare at the time. And this made Greg Toland very interested in working with him because he had the freedom to experiment with the depth of field, the lighting, the camera, and so on. To explain the plot of the movie, it's about this newspaper tycoon, Charles Foster Kane, who says the word rosebud before he dies.
Rosebud.
And now us, the audience, follow Mr. Thompson, a newspaper reporter, while he goes on a journey and talks to the people closest to Mr. Kane and attempt to understand what he meant by this last word. The story is told in a non-linear way, which means we see Mr. Kane from the point of view of the people who once surrounded him through flashbacks and memories, and not simple facts about his life. Now, if you compare the newsreel played at the beginning of the movie with what the characters describe, you see the difference between mere facts and subjective opinions. This type of non-linear storytelling was not very often used, and even though Citizen Kane was not the first movie to use this method, it was the most successful of its time and the most influential. One of the movies that was influenced by this type of storytelling was Kurosawa's Rashomon, and we can also see later influences of the non-linear storytelling method in Christopher Nolan's movies. Everyone who watches the movie has a different feeling towards Mr. Kane. Some sympathize with him, some dislike him, and others don't really feel much towards him, which I find quite fitting because each character in the movie also experiences a different sentiment towards him.
I can't help but admire him. He's crazy.
It's wonderful.
But what is clear to everyone is that Kane's childhood had a big effect on the way he acted later on in his life, and maybe why he needed to succeed in everything. And everyone around him did too. For example, with his second wife, we see Kane forcing her to sing night after night at the opera, which leads to her hurting herself. There's a scene in the movie where Kane says to a reporter, "We're gonna be in opera." He doesn't say "my wife," he says "we," because he thinks that the success or failure of his wife is a direct reflection on him.
We're going to be a great opera star.
Are you going to sing at the Metropolitan, Mrs. Kane?
We certainly are.
It's also quite obvious that Kane has attachment issues. We see throughout the movie repeated many times by Jedediah and his wife that Charles just wanted to be loved. All he wanted was love, he just didn't have any to give. And we can trace that back to his childhood. A young boy who loves his mother but was somewhat abandoned by her and sent to another city with a banker to get educated. What can we conclude from that? Maybe that Charlie has lost his trust to love and doesn't want to be disappointed again, but also lacks love, so he's now become a man that only wants to receive love but doesn't want to be vulnerable and love anyone other than himself, the only person he can trust. Moving on to the techniques used in the movie, like the extreme wide shots, the deep focus, the extreme low angle shots, showing the ceiling in the shots, and many other things that nowadays might seem ordinary to us. But at the time, Citizen Kane was one of the first movies to use these techniques. On the other hand, the movie has amazing editing techniques. For example, the breakfast scene with his first wife or the opera scene with his second wife, which are both masterfully made. So you see, when watching a movie, it should be analyzed according to its time and its environment. Watching a film almost 80 years after it was made and judging it without consideration for its history, where it comes from, and also the role it had in the future of filmmaking seems quite unfair. I hope that this video helps you understand why so many people think of Citizen Kane as the greatest movie ever made.